So our next speaker is Kristina Hettne. So she works as a digital scholarship librarian at Leiden University Libraries. And she's actually a close colleague of mine. And I feel very lucky to have Kristina as a colleague. Kristina is an expert on fair data management and open access. She has a background in data science, research reproducibility, and bioinformatics. She's facilitated many workshops related to reproducible science. She organized ReproHacks, many workshops on fair data, and she regularly advises researchers on open science. And she's an active participant in international networks such as the RDA and GoFair. And she's also authored numerous research publications on all of these topics. So in today's lecture, Kristina will talk about how to organize a ReproHack and about how to reproduce the results of a certain study. So Kristina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. I will start sharing my slides. Indeed, so what, sorry, I will just, yeah. Hello, everybody, and it was great listening to the previous talk, and I think it fits very well in the flow on what I will talk about now, on so not only ReproHacks, but also how to, what you can think about to reproduce when you want to reproduce the results of a study, or when you want to make your own study reproducible. But first, I think it's useful to have a look at some definitions, and also to sort of scope the lecture, and that I'm going to talk about more or less is the computational side, so the computational reproducibility. And this is a very useful figure from the Turing Way Community Handbook for Reproducible Data Science. And I very much recommend you to go and have a look at this handbook and learn about this subject in a very user-friendly way. In this figure, they put the analysis on one side, the data on the other side. So if you have the same data, same analysis, then you talk about, then it is reproducible. If you have different data and the same analysis, then it's about replicable. Same data, different analysis, it's about robustness. Different data and different analysis, it's about generalizability. So some definitions to make it even more clear, hopefully. That's, so how do we call, when is something reproducible? Well, a result is reproducible when the same analysis steps performed on the same dataset consistently produces the same answer. For replicable, it's when the same analysis performed on different datasets produces qualitatively similar answers. And robustness, when the same dataset is subjected to different analysis workflows to answer the same research question. For example, one pipeline written in R and another written in Python, and qualitatively similar or identical answer is produced. And generalizable, so really combining replicable and robust findings allows to form generalizable results. And it's an important step towards understanding that the result is not dependent on a particular data set nor a particular version of the analysis pipeline. So really diving into this very, hopefully quite concretely, I wrote down a sort of reproducibility checklist. So if you look at this picture on the right-hand side, which is also from the Turing Way book. You can see the sort of road when you know, doing research, providing or reproducing a result, that you need the data, the tools, the code, and the results. And I also added the research question or abstract to understand what the experiment is about. And I wanted to put down one of my own experiments, actually, not because I always do everything right, but this was a paper that we really tried our best to make it reproducible and make everything available for reuse. And it was published a couple of years ago in PLOS One. It's called the Implicitome, a resource for rationalizing gene disease associations. It was a text mining experiment, and we put the data in Dryad at that time. And Dryad is a data repository. So what you see here is a screenshot of the sort of publication package, you can say, in Dryad, where we put down the research question, or the abstract in this case, to describe the research. We added the input data and metadata needed to understand this research. So we had a number of problem identifiers that we fed into the system, and the concepts, sort of the vocabulary used to encode for the text mining. The tooling that we used, we tried to show in a code overview, or sort of how these look together, and we deposited that as well. For the code and code documentation, we had a pre-compiled files for software dependencies available, and we put the source code in a GitHub repository. We also added the results in terms of in a couple of different formats as nano-publications or comma-separated value formats. So this is, hopefully you would think that, okay, you have all this information and you have the paper, and then you should be able to use this data and code and everything, and yeah, reproduce what we did or use it for your own purposes. What I wanted to say also is that for this was done just before the FAIR data paper came out about guidelines for FAIR data. So FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it was very interesting. Well, I was part of the research group where these principles were also developed. And of course, we used that as a guideline when trying to make our things available. And what actually I thought about it now is that the data, or the things that I showed you in the previous slide, have actually been reused by others as well. What I noticed at that time was that it still took a bit of communication back and forth between the users to make sure that they understood the data and the code. And thinking about that, the FAIR guiding principles, like I said, to be findable, it says here that the most important are to be assigned, that metadata and data are assigned a globally unique and persistent identifier. It's about rich metadata, and that really the metadata include identifier to the data, and that is indexed in a searchable resource. And in its case, this was the Dryad. But I have to say that we could have probably done a much better job in the metadata phase, of really describing how everything was put together. Although we did our best, we noticed when people tried to use it, they still had questions. So I think it's important to see it as a process as well. And the accessibility part is how it's being stated in these FAIR principles is quite technical. It talks about the communications protocols, the authentication, authorization procedures. And I think that is, of course, very much important, but as a researcher, you should really think about the metadata, that it really should be accessible even when the data are no longer available, or if you're not available, if it's not possible to put the data out there for privacy reasons, maybe, or intellectual property, that at least the metadata can be made available. And for the interoperable part, these guidelines, they talk about a formal, accessible, shared, broadly applicable language for knowledge representation. That's about how you model your data, how do you present it to the rest of the world. Like I said, we use nanopublication, which is a linked open data format, but we also use comma-separated value files. And then it's also about vocabularies following FAIR principles, or at least, try to use a vocabulary to encode your variables. That is, and also that the references to other data or metadata. And finally, about the reusable part, I think it really tries to emphasize these principles that you really think about richly describing, keeping in mind if someone else wants to use the data, would it be possible? And that it really should have a data usage license attached to it. So, how do you know how to reuse the data? Detailed provenance and domain relevant community standards. Now we can also, of course, talking about briefly data management here, that if we translate these concepts to how, when you're planning at the beginning stage, maybe about your data and making it available, then the findable part is really about the persistent identifier, organization of data, allocation of data. Accessible, we can think about the security, sustainability, and the access conditions, legal conditions. Interoperable about software, documentation standards and formats. And reusable about the license and the provenance. Really starting to think about these concepts in an early stage will really help towards the end. And I wanted to show the same slide again that I did with the sort of the checklist, but then with the FAIR principles on it. So here we can argue that it's findable because you can, and the data set has a digital object identifier and it's citable. It's interoperable because we took effort into providing it in interoperable formats. And it is accessible because, yeah, we have been trying to describe the data and provide relevant metadata. And it's reusable because it has a license. It has a license attached to it. It's in the public domain, the CC0 license. Now, this was really focusing on the data, and I also heard the previous speaker was talking, yeah, we talk about data, but we also mean software, and that's what you usually hear a lot. It's also in the FAIR paper when it came out that it's really focusing on data, and then it's a sort of, but it's of course for software as well. Now, this has been taken up for the software community to look at how exactly does the FAIR principles, are they really one-to-one data and software, or do we need some, some specific ideas about that? So you could follow this link to the FAIR software site, which is a really, also a sort of hands-on way to look at how to make your software more fair. And the basic principles are to use a publicly available repository with access control, adding a license, registering the code in a community registry, enable citation of the software, and use a software quality checklist. Now, I showed you, well, that, like I said, this the effort that we took into putting everything available, I can estimate it to be around 20% of the whole project's time. And that is a lot. So usually you receive funding for your research project, and 20% is usually not put into making things available. And of course, that if you do it a second time, it will go faster, and you also learn how to make things available. But if you do it the first time, it will take a lot of time. And that's actually what you see what's happening in practice. So this is a recent blog from the PLOS Director of Open Research Solutions. And when they asked researchers, so why have you not shared your code publicly in the past? And you see that the main reason is that it takes too much time to prepare code for sharing. So time is a big issue. Also, the software and system dependencies, which I think will, the next speaker, Gabrielle, will talk more about. But the third reason would be the concerns with my ability to prepare the code for sharing. So, of course, the fourth reason is that I need to protect intellectual property. That is obviously a reason, but it's not the number one. The first reasons are really about the time it takes, people feeling insecure in sharing, and not knowing how to do it. So how to try to counter this? Well, we talked about it before. Award researchers for their reproducibility efforts is definitely a big factor, of course. And I would like to add, really start on time. So I give regular workshops to research about data management, and data management plans are becoming common practice, but research software plans are also starting to pop up. And I think it's a really nice development, and it will, if you start on time, you don't do everything at the end, it will save you time in the long run. But last not least, educate. So the researchers of today, they need to know a lot of things. They need to have a lot of skills, digital skills, for example, and that's, because if you write a research software, it's not production ready software. It's different. It's written for a very specific purpose. And it's arguable if you should have the same, maybe you shouldn't have the same demands as for production software, but there should at least be some, you should know the pressure points and definitely how to document your code, for example. And there are some very useful tools to help you with that. For example, doing version control when you write your code using Git. And I put in the link there to a site with a short course from the software carpentry on how to work with Git and GitHub, and also even integrate it into your R environment. Also using GitHub, which is basically a repository for code as while you're working with it. But afterwards, when you're done and you want to archive, then I will recommend to use, for example, Zenodo, because it's easy to work together with GitHub. Since GitHub is not an archive, Zenodo is, and it has more sustainability demands. You can also look into things like the Jupyter Notebook for interactive computing, and really very useful tools for documentation. And not only tooling, but really teaching about things like this in workshops and courses, shorter sessions like a coffee corner setup where researchers just meet to discuss reproducibility issues they have, or just wanted to learn a specific thing about the coding language that they are using. And now I wanted to move on to just as ReproHack as an example of a certain workshop to organize. So how does a ReproHack work? Well, basically it's researchers that try to reproduce results reported by papers that have been submitted to the ReproHack. And the ReproHack event, it really provides a low pressure sandbox environment for practicing reproducible research practices. And as a participant, you learn, you practice, you try out your skills and learn from the others in that environment as well. We like to hope that it will be furthering science by increasing the skills for reviewing and producing reproducible research. And also authors that submit their papers to a ReproHack, they get feedback and acknowledgements for their efforts. Just to show you what it would, such a workshop could look like. This was one that we gave in about 1.5 years ago in the Leiden University Library. It was a one day. We started with some coffee and tea and welcome, and getting to know each other, which is, creating this sort of warm, welcoming atmosphere, and really give the feeling to people that they can safely speak and out their minds, but be with a respectful tone towards each other. And we then had a presentation about tools for reproducible research. After that, where we started to form groups and actually start hacking. Very important lunch break, get people food, then they have energy to hack, and then continue hacking, and then have a sort of a breakout again with listening to another talk about reproducibility, for example, and this time by John Boyd. The first one was by Anna Cristalli. Then we continued hacking and finally reported back, and some drinks and bites to discuss follow-ups or issues that took place. And if you want to organize such a ReproHack, there are tools to do that. So I have the final slide is sort of summarizing all the different things, but I wanted to mention that there is an organizer template, for example. It's a link here. It's just a Google spreadsheet that you can make your own copy, and it will guide you through what you need to think about when to organize such a ReproHack. And now I wanted to just show you, okay, imagine you have, you're sitting in a ReproHack, you have a lot of, found a paper that you would try to reproduce. And well, this is the one that I will just show you. It's called Comparisons of Citizen Science Data Gathering Approaches to Evaluate Urban Butterfly Diversity. And it's been used in a previous ReproHack. It was tried to, as you can see here, it was submitted by Kathleen Pruddick. It had been tried in a number of attempts for reproducibility 3 times, and the mean reproducibility score was 9 out of 10. So it's already a nice paper, which you will see. So why should we attempt to reproduce this paper? This was what the author had asked us, and this is a fairly digestible paper with statistical analysis and data visualization that rely heavily on open data from citizen science projects. So you have the paper URL, the data URL, code URL, and it also then says that the useful programming skills here are that are So what we would be doing was that we would start by reading the paper abstract. You would be inspecting the code in GitHub, for example, and then think about these questions. So I'm just going to show you the code in GitHub, and I just wanted you to think about like how well was the material documented, how could the documentation be improved, what did you like about the documentation, are materials clearly covered by a permissive enough license to build upon. And these are questions that are taken from the form that researchers would fill out when they have been and when they are done with a paper. So I'm going to stop this share, and I'm going to share my browser instead. Let me see. Okay, so you have this is the paper, and in sake of time, I will not read through the abstract, but it's at least this is the this is the paper, so it's open access, so you could have a read and think about, okay, these graphs and how are they how are they produced. So what I wanted to show was so this is the GitHub repository, and this is the, as you know, though, repository. So this is really the archive where you could also download the data and the code. But the GitHub repository is a bit more useful to actually go through. And here you can see that it says there is a README file, and that README file it has a summary about this repository. So a README file tells you what you can expect, and that it includes source data for bioscan, butterfly scan surveys, as well as process data from iNaturalist. 2 folders are included in the repository: data and scripts. One is implied output, but not on the version control. So when you run your code, you should create this output directory. There are also markdown formative files with brief reports on various metrics and comparisons performed for this study. There's also a link to the actual paper, which is very nice. And we can have a check here. You see there's a folder data, and indeed it has all the data in comma separated formats. There's a folder of scripts. There are shell scripts, R scripts. So indeed, there are scripts. There is a license, by the way, also added, an MIT license. This is a very permissive license. And we can see that here, these RMD, this is R Markdown files, but there's also PDF files that you can go through and you can have a look at, okay, how do I run these abundance analyses that are reported in the paper. It tells you how to set up, what actually coders you should, what you should actually write down, the data wrangling part, the statistical analyses, and the results. So yeah, that is just to, these will be similar ones for the other sort of reported results in the paper. And I think when I look at this, I think, okay, I I can understand, and I could probably try to read on these analysis, understand how to use it. The only thing I really miss is the link to the paper. So where in the paper were these specific analyses performed, and that link is a little bit weak. But otherwise, this is a nice documentation, and yeah, you can have, of course, always comments on how to document things even better. But also to say that this is, as far as I go for this one, and then the next speaker, Gabrielle, she will look more into the actual running of this code. So I won't talk too much about it. I will stop share this one. I will reshare. Oh, sorry. I will reshare the PowerPoint. Okay. So if you would like to organize your own ReproHack, where can you actually find inspiration and support? There is a GitHub repository actually for the ReproHack. It's called the ReproHack headquarters, and there are then organizer instructions for you to have a look at. There is a Twitter account, a Slack invite, and an email address. We also wrote up our findings from this first ReproHack in a paper that you could have a look at if you're interested. And then I think I am about out of time. So I will stop sharing. And yeah, that's I guess I'm ready to take questions. It's a little bit of time still.
Thank you, Kristina, for such an elaborate and well-informed overview of all of these standards and approaches that can enhance reproducibility. I think that the talk really contained many useful pointers for researchers aiming to make their work more transparent. It's also great to see these examples from your own research. I think that's really made things very concrete. Also good to hear about your experiences with organizing these ReproHacks. So I hope that many people will feel inspired to organize a ReproHack. Actually, during your talk, many very interesting questions have been written in the chat. And I believe that a number of late questions have also come in for the first speaker. But conscious of the time, it's already 4:15, I suggest that we leave the questions for the time being, and that we save all the questions that have been typed in for the panel discussion in the second hour of this seminar, if that's okay with you.